In this video, I want to walk through some of the required software for this class. So regardless of whether you are on Windows, Mac, or Linux, you should be able to run all of these pieces of software. If you can't, and you're in this class, there is a cloud-based alternative where you'll be able to log into one of the IAM lab computers. But I'm going to assume that you're able to install these. So some of these are really easy, like Google Chrome, Node, GitHub Desktop, Git Bash, Teams. Just follow the instructions and follow the install prompts for those. The one that I want to walk through is Visual Studio Code because I want you to install at minimum these two extensions to Visual Studio Code as you're installing it. So I'm going to open up a virtual machine here for Windows so that I can show you what it looks like to install Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to just Google search for VS Code. Run it. So VS Code should install pretty quickly. In the install process, options that I like to have are making sure that the command line, the CLI command for opening Visual Studio Code is installed. So if we open up a terminal window, it's easy for us to open up Visual Studio from that terminal window. I like my files to be associated with Visual Studio Code. So if I double click on an HTML file, it'll open in Visual Studio. And then I like having these right-click options where I can right-click on a file or on a folder to be able to open that in Visual Studio Code. Select all those, install. I'm going to pause the video for a second while this installs. And done. So what I'm going to do is create a quick test web page so that we can see some of these extensions that we're about to install in action. So I'm going to create a new folder, call this test project, and then I'm going to drag this folder into Visual Studio to open that folder in here, and then I'm going to create an index.html file. We're going to walk through this a lot more slowly when we get to actually building websites ourselves. For this, basically, I'm going to go into the index.html file. I'm going to hit exclamation point and then enter to get a skeleton created for me for HTML file for a website. And then I'm going to just type in hi there and save it. So we have Visual Studio Code installed. And quick tour of some of the features. We have this first tab is our sidebar for our project, which shows us the open tabs that we have, and if we have opened any folders, we'll see those there, and we get this outline view for all of the elements that are inside of our file. We have a search command, which allows us to search through our project and potentially replace text. We've got version control, which when we get into a software called Git and we talk about version control, we'll use. We have a debugging tab, which again, we'll talk about later. But for now, the extension tab is the most important thing because I want you to install at minimum 2 extensions to use inside of our web projects. So one of them is called Live Server. So if you search for something in the extensions and then click on it, you will see instructions that explain what the extension is and how to install it. These are all community contributed for the most part, so the quality of the instructions is up to the individual developer who made the extension. But Live Server is a really nice server for working on web projects. So we are going to install that. And once it has finished installing, we should be able to go back to our index.html file, right-click, and choose Open with Live Server, and see our website pop open in a browser. And the nice thing about Live Server is that it will dynamically refresh the page. So if I change this and save it, our web page updates. Okay, so we have live server. The other one that I want you to install is called Prettier. And Prettier is a code formatter. So a code formatter is a tool that will take code as input and output code that has been formatted according to a consistent set of styling rules. So once that's finished, we can test it out. If we are in an HTML file, and I'm going to add a bunch of white space in here, and then I'm going to open up the command palette by either right-clicking and clicking on command palette, or I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P, and into this I'm going to search for the format document command. And with this, I'm going to go to Format Document With, and if Prettier installed correctly, we should see Prettier as one of these options. And as soon as I click it, what's going to happen is our HTML file will be reformatted according to consistent rules defined by Prettier. So this is going to be really helpful when you're working on your projects so that you don't always have to worry about how your code is formatted. You can just focus on getting the right code in there. One other thing I'll show you, you don't have to do this, but there are themes in the extensions. So I like to use Pale Night as my theme. So if I install it, it installs a couple of Pale Night options. I'm going to just choose this default one, and now I have a purple hue theme for Visual Studio. The other thing that I'll show you is that the settings menu is really useful. File, Preferences, Settings, or Control, comma. This has options like the font size of your editor. So if you want to bump up everything, you could change your font size to 18, and now everything will be bigger. There are a whole bunch of options in here. Like for instance, if we search for Prettier, the extension that we just installed, there are now options for Prettier, like controlling what line width we want to use. For instance, maybe we want to use 100 as our line width instead of 80 characters. So if you're looking to configure something about Visual Studio, it's a good bet that there is an option in here for controlling certain things like the font that your editor is using, and then settings for the different extensions you've installed. So this is a helpful place to go. Okay, with that, you should have Visual Studio installed, and you should have at minimum Live Server and Prettier installed.